Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Glad you're watching this video. I'm going to be sharing some music production tips and techniques while recreating the beat in Lady Gaga's Rain on Me featuring Ariana Grande. So let me start by playing you the finished product. All right, let's start by focusing in on the drums. I'm going to start with our foreground beat, and that's the kick, clap, and the ride that we hear going on in the groove. So I've got a drum rack here loaded, and I'm just going to double click here. That's going to give us a 1 bar groove to work with. So using my pencil tool by hitting the B letter on my computer keyboard allows me to draw in my notes, but we want to change the grid. So Command 2, and now we can draw in our kick drums at every quarter note value. And then let's place our clap on the 2 and on the 4. There we go. And let's play that. Now, I call this the foreground beat because really these are at the spotlight. That kick drum is going to be everything. Everything anchors around that kick drum when it comes to the drums and the rest of the percussion. So let's also add a ride cymbal there, playing a quarter note as well. It's amazing that adding that ride, even though it's the same, same quarter note value as the kick drum, it really does change the overall feel of the groove. And that has to do a lot because of the decay of the actual ride cymbal. And now next, let's go ahead and incorporate a loop or percussion loop on top of this foreground beat to kind of start gluing this all together. Okay, so here I have a loop that I'm going to be using, and let's just check out the loop itself. Got a cool pattern to it. It kind of, resembles a lot of the groove that we hear initially in the reference. So I'm going to do a couple things so that it just meshes well with the clap and kick that we've got going on, the foreground beat. So we've got an EQ. I want to take away some of that low end. We don't really see much there anyways, but let's just take some of that away. And that's going to thin it out a little bit. But so I want to make sure I'm taking away some of the harshness that we got. And then to really kind of fit well with the groove, let's go ahead and turn our compressor on to sidechain mode and then use the drum rack and then the kick drum to be the source of the sidechain. And that's really going to give the pumping that we're looking for. Now, being that there's a lot of highs going on here, that majority of what we're getting is like the high mids and the highs, it kind of will stick out easier in the mix. It's gonna, highs are really usually a good indicator of being right up front in the mix. So I can kind of dial the volume of this loop back a little bit, giving the kick and the clap more breathing room. Okay, let's add in another loop. Now, as I was browsing for these loops, what I'm listening for is the accent of the rhythm that matches as closest to the reference. And that's just kind of my guide as I'm combing through a bunch of different samples or different loops that I might have on my hard drive. I'm not just grabbing random ones and putting them together. Obviously, I want the loops that are going to accentuate certain parts of the rhythm that, fit the reference. Or if you're just working on house music in general, I'm just kind of looking for the one that really is going to create a pocket of rhythm that I really am feeling. So the problem can be that you just grab as many loops and just throw them on there, but they might actually be clashing because they might actually be accenting in different parts of the rhythm that won't give you a nice cohesive groove. So that's really the goal here when you're putting a bunch of loops together. And it's very hard, and it's really tempting to just stack on a whole bunch of house drum loops together and then call it a day. So I'm really looking for the right loops that work well together to create one cohesive sound. So I have this audio track here with a couple loops just to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So let's start from the top. So it's a little similar to what we have here. You can hear how that hi-hat has that because of the ducking as well that we added with the sidechain, but that the same hi-hats are being accented here. So even though this green loop is adding a bit more brightness because it also has a different hi-hat cymbal doing the same thing, they're accenting the same. So I don't really want that to happen. Let's check out the next loop here. Now that's cool because they have different rhythm parts in that are accenting different pockets. So let's see what that sounds like with this groove. And that's really cool. That might work right away to actually start working on some stuff, but it doesn't match the rhythmic feel of the reference. So I'm going to keep going. So I like some of the elements that we have here, where you have some of the upbeats that are being accented here with the snare drum. And that's this sound here. And let's go to the next one. So I think the closest one is this one here. And I might want to do some editing where we don't have that snare drum happen on every beat. So I'm going to take this over to my arrangement window. And I have that here. And I'm simply just going to edit it so that we just only hear that snare drum in certain places. So what I've essentially done is this is the whole loop here. So I just copied this half again, just like that. And that's it. And so that's our new loop. So we're going to have this, since I created this in the arrangement window, we can let that play and still have these loops triggered in the session view for right now. So this is going to be our one united groove. So I'm going to go to this loop as well, and let's go ahead and take away some of that low end that we have here. And let's add some of the similar compression side chaining that we did for our first loop. So we'll go to drum rack 1, and we'll go to the kick drum. Just a little bit here. Great. Now let's just group these all together, and that's going to help kind of glue them all as one loop. That's what we're trying to go for here, is that we're trying to recreate one whole loop here. So on the actual drum group that we've got here, I'm going to go ahead and put Ableton Live's drum bus. And if you're following along and you're not using Ableton Live, you can get the same results by using a saturator, because I'm just adding some drive here and a little bit of like crunch, which you can find maybe from some type of distortion or a little bit of overdrive, and using an EQ to damp away all the high end. So basically anything from 20 hertz above is being erased. And then we've got a little bit of some transient here. And the reason why I've chosen to use the drum bus, because it has basically all these elements in one plugin. And I like the little boom, which is basically a nice subharmonic enhancer. So I'm actually adding some more low end boost by increasing the boom here. So this is the drums without it. And this is with it. So I'm giving, it's nice to just boost that low end as a collective and not just get it into the kick there. So yeah, so I'm going to leave that on the drums. I've dialed the dry and wet about 91% and love the results. So let's just keep on moving. All right, let's go ahead and rock that bass line. So for this, I'm going to use IK Multimedia's Moto Bass. If you've seen any videos on my channel, you know I use this a lot. I love the results. So I'm going to be using the 60s P bass patch, doing a couple little tweaking here. I'll get into that in a bit. But first, let's go ahead and check out the actual riff. So here we have the bass line. And then inside the plugin itself, just selecting the model, I've chose the play style from the finger to picking, because the finger is going to give a little bit more low end, and the picking will give me a bit more of the high end and that mid range. And that's what I want to cut through a little bit more. And so just dialed up a little bit of the muting, some detached noise, and try to get it sounding as real as possible. Strings are old, and I always like the way the old or broken in strings sound on the bass. And left the electronics and amp alone, and that was really it. And then what I've done is I'm going to do some processing here. So what I'm going to do is I want a little bit of distortion. I'm going to go to the overdrive, but I want to blend this in with a dry signal. So once I put the overdrive on the bass, might be a little too much. And yeah, we can dial the dry and wet here. But what I want to do is just simply hit Command G, and that's going to group that overdrive, and it's going to create an audio effect rack. So let's right click here and create a dry one. So now I know that this will be my dry signal. Put that on the top. Give it another color if you want. Sure, have a yellow. And then this is the chain down here with the distortion and stuff like that. So I can now crank this to 100, and I can balance out right here. And the reason why is like, well, why don't you just use the dry and wet on this and on the overdrive and just call it a day? Well, because I'm also going to be adding some EQ to the drive. I want to take away some of all the low end and let the dry chain just be just live in that region there. Basically, what I'm trying to do is shape the distorted signal. I want to treat this differently and separately than the actual dry signal. So once I have it to a place that I like, maybe not too much drive, just a little bit of warm crunch that's going to come through. So when I blend the two together, that's just going to help have it cut through in the mix a little bit. Then I can add an EQ on the overall blend between these two. And then let's go ahead and add some side chaining because that's really going to help create the pocket that we're looking for. We're going to grab this side chain directly from the kick drum here. So I'll go to drum rack and we'll go to the kick. Now let's see what that sounds like with the drums. Now I'm feeling like adding a sub layer to that bass line just to get a little bit more bottom end beef without compromising any of the low end from the actual bass riff. So I'm going to grab a wavetable, and you could follow along using any synth you might have in your DAW. And let's go ahead and copy holding the Option key. Just click and drag the actual bass riff over to the wavetable. So naturally, you might want to start off with a sine wave. And let's go from polyphonic to monophonic so that the notes aren't overlapping. And let's go a whole octave down. Now it's adding some good sub, but might want a little presence here. I'm going to switch it up. Maybe go from a sine wave to a square. That's going to give me a lot more presence as well. So I'll use the filter cutoff here. Here's the difference with the square and the sine. So I'm going to go bounce between the square and the sine and see what that sounds like with the bass, with the actual moto bass. But let me copy the side chain first, and let's get an EQ and before the side chain there, and just eliminate any of the high end. Put that together with the bass. And I might want to, well, let's just hear how it sounds like with everything else. So that is a square. What about the sine wave? So this is a decision that's going to be felt more than heard. And so I've got that in there to just give some more of that low end energy there, and not necessarily to hear the sub. Now, for this next section, I'm not saying this is the exact steps taken to get the results, or what I'm doing is really just kind of putting what I think can help recreate the vibe that we're hearing on this record. And it most likely feels or sounds like they took a guitar sample and had a piano layer also with the chords and affecting that. So with that in mind, that's how I'm approaching this next part here. So let's start with the chords, and I'm using an Ableton Live grand piano, basic stock piano preset here. I'm gonna play the chords. All right. And then just a couple settings. I just made sure that the hardness was all the way, and this really deals with the velocity. If the hardness is all the way down, you just get a softer feel of the performance. So the velocity is set to pretty much 0. So let's put it all the way to 127. Kind of gives you that classic throwback house piano vibe. So we need to brighten it up a little bit, and that's why I'm using the OTT multi-band compressor in Ableton Live. And that's just squeezing each of these 3 bands right here with some compression. And then EQ to just give some more low end. No, so that's going to be instrument layer 1. And then I have, let's use a guitar. I've cut out a couple guitar samples here. And so I'll play that dry, and that guitar sample is just accenting that section there. And underneath that's another guitar part. This is more with like a wah and a little couple, just some palm muting. Now I just made sure that they were set in the right key signature. And really with all 3 of them together, you get this. Now, what we need to do is group them together and treat them as one sample. So let's go ahead and do that. Holding Shift, selecting all 3 tracks, and then hitting Command G, and then we're going to group them. And here, what really is going to give the texture and the overall vibe is a phaser. So let's go ahead and use a phaser plugin. So once we have all those elements grouped, let's head over to our Ableton Live audio effects folder and look for our phaser plugin, and just click and drag that onto the group. Now, the phaser is really unique in the sense that the way it affects the audio is I'm getting more of a swirl effect. And that's kind of what I'm looking for, because that's what I'm hearing in the reference. So what we're going to do is do some tweaking here with the parameters. And so this phaser plugin in particular has a unique switch here. We have Earth, which kind of gives a more, focuses a lot more maybe on the lower end of the spectrum, and then Space gives it a whole unique different type of texture and tone to it. So I'm just going to move around over here until we find a sweet spot. So that's a good spot there. And then let's go ahead and change the poles around. What I'm really looking for here as I'm tweaking these parameters is I'm looking for movement. And we're going to create that with the LFO in a little bit, but let's get the texture down a little. And now setting the rate to be sync with our project, let's set it to 1 bar, because that's how frequent the swirling is going to happen every bar. And then let's raise the amount and adjust the envelope. So at the initial attack of this plugin, we have a little bit more accentuated, like the actual effect is being accentuated. So it's giving that nice swirl that we're hearing. All right, next, let's go ahead and add some graininess to this, and I'm going to use the Redux, some digital distortion to that. Hidden soft. And that really helps those guitar chucks just kind of cut through and give a really cool texture to it. And after that digital distortion, let's go ahead and grab the sidechain compression. Just holding Option, drag that right after that, and check that out. Okay, and then just a little bit of EQing. And I might actually want to widen this up a little bit. So I'm going to use the utility plugin here in Ableton Live. And this has a knob here that says width. And what we're going to do is just feed a little bit more information to the side. So you have mid, which you can turn it all the way here to the left. And then you have the side. So let's just feed a little bit more to the side and make this a little wider. Now, I can only imagine having a session with Ariana Grande and Lady Gaga. You'll have a bunch of vocals at your disposal to chop up, tweak, and add some nice ear candy, which Blood Pop did in this production. and they did a great job doing that. So I don't have those vocals. So out of necessity, I'm going to record myself just singing a couple of the parts and then pitching them down to add into the mix here. So what I've done is I pitched up the original reference about 4 semitones up. And then I sang, I think, Me, right? Because that's that part where it says, Lady Gaga says, rain on me. So that's me here. And this is me singing it at the pitched up key signature. I do sound like some kind of deranged seal asking people for fish at the SeaWorld or something like that. So once that's there, I can then go ahead and pitch it down. So obviously here we're at the G sharp 2. So it's got that texture to it, being pitched down, making sure that it's set to warp and complex, set to complex. So it has that pitch down tuning as opposed to complex pro. Will try to keep the formants, or it'll try to make it sound natural as possible. So I'm not going for that. I wanted to actually purposely sound pitched down. So we'll go with complex. And then let's go ahead and EQ the bottom end of that and just brighten it up a little bit with the high mids and the highs. And then compressing this so that we just get a nice, squelch performance. There you go. And drenching this with chorus to actually widen up the sound here. Now I'm going to send a little bit of this to the reverb that I have set to return track B. And as you can see here on return track B, we have an EQ going before the reverb. And this is really to control any of the low end and the high end. And this is really just like a short kind of room. And I also want to send some of the drums to this as well. And this is going to give some nice ambience and kind of fill in the gaps here. So let's solo the drums. So I love the ambience that's giving to the drums. It's really cool. And then also have a delay set to return track A using the Ableton Live Echo, 8th note delay. And so I'm going to send a little bit of that to the vocal sample that we've just done here. And then I'm also going to do the same thing for this. Let's just create some ambience and send a little bit of delay to the group that we've done. Now let's see everybody together and see what it sounds like. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video has been helpful and encouraging and inspiring in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you want to watch this video and follow along using the sounds and maybe even the session that I'm showing you here, you can go ahead and do so by clicking the link below in the description box and downloading the session files for this, as well as a sample pack that I've put together loaded with construction kits, one-shots, transition effects. These are all yours, absolutely free, royalty-free, so feel free to use them in your projects. And for those of you who are following along and not using Ableton Live, but want to use some of the files that I'm using in this session, I've got you covered. Once you click the link below in the description box, go ahead and download the project file, and you will unzip it, and you'll see the project file called Rain on Me B. And just simply open that folder up and look for the folder that says samples. In there, it'll show imported and recorded. So any files that I've used that I've imported will be located here. And anything that I've recorded, such as myself screaming like a dying seal, you could find that here in the recorded section. And then just go ahead and watch the video over as many times as you want and follow along with the steps that I've shown you. Now, very important, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button on this channel so that YouTube will keep you up to date with upcoming videos, as well as my live Q&As that I randomly do. And you'll be notified once you subscribe and like this video. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.